Welcome everybody for the night before Veterans Day. And as a veteran myself and a family of veterans, I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it, and I'm super excited for this virtual program. Just to note that it is being recorded, so please keep your cameras on off and muted. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will be fielding them and asking our panelists here about it. And without further ado, let's get started with my part, and then you don't have to hear me again. Welcome to Veterans of Washington-Escobedo community, presented by Bruce Nelson about an exhibit that he has created. And these photos that you see here are just a small sampling of what he's got prepared for you. So first, I have to do a couple of logistic things. Your program today is brought to you not just by Bruce Nelson, but also Todd Bailey, who is the Special Projects Manager at the Arizona Historical Society and a personal friend of Bruce Nelson. So this is really a treat. And myself, I am Dr. Laura Key. I'm the managing editor of the Journal of Arizona History at the Arizona Historical Society. And I'm, again, just super happy to be here. I definitely volunteered for this presentation. All right, so first, some helpful reminders. Please use the chat box for comments and questions. Because of the number of participants, we encourage non-presenters to keep your video off and muted. This event is being recorded, and a link to the recording and survey about what you thought about this will be sent out to all participants. If you enjoy this program, please consider becoming a member. We are able to put on these great programs for you with the support from viewers like yourself. I sound like PBS here. You know, these programs are part of our mission, connecting people through the power of Arizona history, and that's why we all work here, and it's why we do these programs. So this is just one of the many cool programs that we are offering through COVID and before, and we're just super proud to bring you Arizona history. The Arizona Historical Society is a nonprofit organization and state agency established in 1864, battle-born, right? We have 4 museums across the state. Please visit all of them. They're all different, but they all have really cool stuff. We collect, preserve, and tell the story of Arizona's past through museum, exhibitions, libraries, and archives, historic sites, educational programs like today, and the Journal of Arizona History, which of course I am partial to. In the center there is a sample caliber. On the top left there is Buzz Aldrin's suit. Come see our space exhibit at the Tucson Museum. It's super cool. It ends at the end of the month, so come on in while it's still up. Some amazing stuff. Again, if you enjoyed this presentation, please become a member. Sign up for our email list, follow us on social media, order this really cool monsoon license plate. I know it's not monsoon season, but you can carry it with you. Visit us at our website at azhs.org today. All right, now that I got my part over, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to hand this over to Todd Bailey. And each of us have different PowerPoint. So give us a second while we stop sharing and bring up the other one. There'll just be a little bit of a downtime, but it's totally worth it. And hope you enjoy the program, and I'll see you after everybody's done. Todd, this is you.
Hey, I lost it there.
No worries. Hey, we're all getting here.
The screen there. So, Bruce, I kind of lost your screen there, Laura.
Oh, I am so sorry.
That's okay.
Hold on one second. There you go.
It's absolutely all right. So Bruce Nelson, I feel like I could do this by heart, but I want to get it right. Bruce Nelson is an independent curator, documentary filmmaker, and published author from Mesa, Arizona. His work as a curator and documentarian focuses heavily on his experience of living in a once segregated Washington-Escobedo neighborhood. His method of curation uses community input as its foundation to thereby reflect and celebrate community members of this often overlooked neighborhood. Nelson's film practice has developed to be in conversation with compatible exhibitions without either relying on one another for context. Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to stop sharing now. We'll try this again.
So,
Todd is going
yeah,
to share his screen now.
thank you. So Bruce and I know each other. Our grandmothers were very, very close friends. And he was my first jazz dance teacher. And, you know, we're from the neighborhood. So this is great. I'm very proud of his work. And I love that we get to work on preserving the history of our people. I'll start off with something you just informed me about, this 1944 documentary called The Negro in America's Wars?
Negro Soldier.
The Negro Soldier. The Negro Soldier, which traced the contributions of African Americans through and beyond their military service. And it was actually a goal to try to recruit more African Americans, right, Bruce?
Yes, it was a film that they put together to recruit. They brought in a Hollywood team, and we're going to show some slides. It was not just film, but it was media posters, and it was amazing. This team, they were first class, and this is how they tried to lure Black folks into the service.
Right. So part of that was this artist, Lou Davis, who usually did, you know, landscapes and Southwestern art, but he created these. These are all posters from our archives at the Historical Society. Our first one. Maybe you have some ideas on what this would have inspired, Bruce. Will your pockets jingle tomorrow?
Yeah, you know, a lot of guys, they either got, if they didn't get drafted, they joined because, you know, money was tight.
Money was
and
tight.
So it was like an opportunity, you know, to find a job. So that was very enticing.
Mm. Neglect your training and risk your life. Take care of the equipment. Take care of our equipment, right? And these are great. We had these up in an exhibit at the Arizona Heritage Center in 2019 called A Place for All People. Syphilis. We could go down a whole topic there on the history of the syphilis trials. If you waste it, there's less at home. What do you think this was about, Riz?
This was all about, you know, you're getting a meal, you're getting fed better than you would at home. So you need to make sure you eat all your food because people are sacrificing for you to have some food on your table as a serviceman.
Don't waste rations. Right?
Yes.
History will judge us by our deeds as well. All right. So those are all from, and those were from the Negro in America's Wars. Those were, you know, a series of pieces by this artist. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Great, thanks, Todd. Yeah, Todd and I go way back. Great to be here, everybody. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully this works. There we go. So I'm going to talk about this. So I'm from the Washington-Escobedo community. And so what I did was it took about, I don't know, 9 months to a year to find all of these soldiers and these stories. And so it was, I just loved doing it, and I had some real challenges because they don't always write a lot of things about African Americans. So what you're about to see is I'm going to highlight a few of them and give you some background on Washington-Escobedo. Hopefully most of you had an opportunity to see the trailer that they had posted, because I may refer to that to time. And so when I create exhibits and documentaries, I do them side by side. And now I'm finding that I'm doing so much research, there's usually a book as well. So I'm going to be the junior Ken Burns of documentary films kind of thing. So that's what we're talking about tonight. So the next slide here, Washington, this is a map that Sarah Moorhead put together. She worked in the city of Mesa in the library. And it's a wonderful map about Washington Park, how it looked before it became Washington-Escobedo. So African Americans arrived in Mesa around 1902, 1903, 1905, right there. And the only place that would rent them or they could get a place to stay was an area called the Mitchell Addition. No place else would people really embrace them. Mitchell Addition, I think everybody probably familiar with Harry Mitchell, he was a congressman or a senator. This was his grandfather. I think his name was John Mitchell. And he embraced letting African Americans live there, along with another place called Tuskegee Place. And I'm still trying to find out how it got that name, Tuskegee, because the Tuskegee Institute hadn't happened yet, and there was no such thing as Tuskegee Airmen in 1905 and beyond. So I'm still trying to track down how they got that name. So it's predominantly African American from like the 1905s up until around 1940. So the war broke out, and then right towards the end of the war, we had a real big increase of Latinos in the area, and it became very mixed. And it stayed very mixed right through the civil rights movement, and then you had this great exodus out of there in the early 80s. A lot of Black folks just moved out. They didn't want to be associated with it anymore, and kind of thing. And so now it's predominantly Latino and just a few African Americans living there. So we're very proud that we are a historical or heritage neighborhood. We just got recognition from the Governor's Award for Historic Preservation, which is really nice. We also got the city, which gives a little bit of protection. So the people coming in, they can't just gentrify us and move everybody out. And so we're really proud of that, to have that happen. So tonight, we're gonna talk about the veterans. And from the beginning, there were veterans in Washington Park. One of the very first ones was Alexander McPherson. He was born into slavery around 1845. And he moved his family in Mesa around 1915, I wanna say 1910, 1915. And the unofficial story goes, he was born in the Deep South, and he was a very trusted slave. And very often they would send him into town to get supplies by himself. He did not need to be escorted. And very often they wouldn't even give him papers because people knew him. And finally, when the war was bubbling and they thought something might happen, and wasn't sure what was going on, he was sent into town and just kept going. He just kept walking, walked his way to freedom, found his way to Virginia, and joined the service. And that's the unofficial story. I haven't written that down. We're still checking with the family. But I did find his records, and he did serve. He served, and on his death certificate, they list him as a veteran from the Civil War. So Alexander McPherson was one of the first ones. So we've always had veterans living in our community there. Another one I want to talk about is George Washington Davis, born in Georgia in 1835, born into slavery. And this guy is very interesting. This picture, man, is pretty haunting when you look at this guy.
Yes.
Expression on his face is just, wow, makes you want to stop and think again. And now this came about, this is the picture that my uncle had given me. I was collecting photos for a family friend, and I said, well, let me get some photos. So I went to my uncle, Uncle Willie, and he said, yeah, I've got some pictures for you. So he gave me this picture, and he said to me, he said that that was his grandfather. And so I kind of stood there and I thought, well, if it's his grandfather, he must be something to me. So I just kind of waited, and he stopped talking. So I thought, well, I'm not going to ask, because when the old folks don't talk about things, it's best to leave it alone.
Leave it there.
So I kept the photo for about a year, and then finally I asked my mom, and she couldn't remember. My mom was like 92 years old. She couldn't remember. And then finally I was going to my aunt's house, and she's about 10 years younger than my mom. And I said, Aunt Ethel, I found this photo Uncle Willie gave me. And before I could even go that far, she said his name was George Washington Davis. He was born a slave. He was a Buffalo Soldier. His mother is a slave from Madagascar. They were born in Georgia. And I'm like, oh my goodness, how do you not tell us this, you know, without this? And so I traced it. I found his death certificate, and you see his mother's name on that, Pleasant Polk. And you see that they were in Georgia. And so they came through here and they were Texas. He's buried in Texas, but they did come through Arizona at one point. So Washington-Escobedo has had veterans from its inception. You know, it's always been there. And so this photo just is so haunting when you look at this photo, when you look at it, kind of thing. And then another one I really, or as I said, now Matthew B. Juan, born in around 1892, he did not live in the community, but I always want to highlight him. He was the first casualty from World War I from Arizona. He's a Native American. And that just really trips my mind out when you think about it. And my 1892, he might have been born a little earlier than that. And when he was in the service, he joined, he was one of the older guys. He was like 24, maybe 25, which was very unusual because most of the guys in the service were like 18, 19, maybe 20. They were all pretty young. But Matthew served, and he went over on a ship and was over in Germany, and unfortunately got killed there. But they pay tribute to him. I think it's in Chandler. They have the Matthew B. Wan, not the VFW, the American Legion is named after him. And so I always just put him in there because I always think about, now, say he's born in 1890. So that would put his father 20 years before that, and his grandfather 20 years before that. And I always just sort of puzzled me. Remember, we were still at war with the Indians then. The Buffalo Soldiers were here in Arizona. They were still patrolling in the 1890s, right up until about 1905. They were still out patrolling. Not only that, but people were still robbing trains. And so for this man as a Native American to feel so confident that he wants to join and go fight for this country always just trips me out, because I'm sure he probably heard some stories about Indian wars from his dad or his grandfather. So you just have to take your hat off to him and say, you know what, he felt like there's something he wanted to do. And there are quite a few Native Americans that joined the service. And most of the time we hear about the code talkers from the Navajo tribe, that's what meant. But the first code talkers were really World War I, were the Choctaw. They were the code talkers first. We don't hear as much about them. There are a few documentaries about them. So that's why I always include Matthew into this presentation. And our next guy here is World War veteran, Technical Sergeant Manuel V Mendoza. And I remember this quote that his daughter said, because he fought in World War II, and then he fought in the Korean War. And he did really well. And you might have seen him, they did a story on him here locally. They called him the Arizona Kid, which I'm not too fond of that, but that's what they called him. And his story is just incredible. He is a real live, true Rambo. And so the documentary, if you saw it, you saw his wife and you saw his daughter, and they're talking about his story. And he was over in Mount Battaglia fighting, and he was by himself. He had got cut off from everybody else, and there were 100 Germans or 120 Germans or some crazy number trying to come up this hill, and he fought them off by himself. He used handguns, he used rifles, he used machine guns, he used hand grenades, and he used a flamethrower. And he fought them off. And not only fought them off, one guy he wounded, and he dragged that guy back. I don't know why he would bother, but he dragged him back to safety.
Incredible.
This man is just, you can't write this kind of stuff. And when we did that trailer, his wife was like 94, 95. It's been about 4 years since we did that trailer because we've been raising money to finish the documentary. So she's almost 100 now. I believe she's still living. So, you know, and he's from that neighborhood. And so, like I said, Washington-Escobedo just has a history of veterans dating back his beginning inception kind of thing. And this guy, you really got to take your hat off to him. And I remember talking to one of his nieces, and she said when he came back from World War II, they would sit around and play cards and stuff. And his cousins and brothers would give him a hard time because he was really quiet. And they would always joke with him, his niece would say, just give him a hard time. And he just kind of sat and didn't say much. And she said one day she was sitting around and some other guy came up who really didn't know him, but he knew of him, but didn't know him. And he started to give him a hard time. And one of his cousins pulled this guy aside and said, you don't know him like that. You have to be careful because he will kill you. He'll sneak into your house and kill you. And he's just that kind of guy. So you can't tease him like that because you don't know him. I thought, wow, that's pretty scary. Wow. But those kind of guys, that's the kind of guy he was, you know, very unassuming. But if you push the wrong buttons, you had a real problem.
But he's seen a lot, you know.
Yes. And so if you remember the documentary, Lita, she talked about her father. He struggled with coming back. He PSD and had a hard time, whereas Manuel, he did well in the service. He definitely struggled, but he didn't have a challenge with drinking like so many of the guys do when they come back, or alcohol or drugs.
And when they come back in life so hard too at that time for minorities, you know, just every day, Jim Crow laws and, where do you work?
Yeah, just everyday living, everyday living. You go over there and you're fighting the enemy and you're fighting, your comrades as well. It's like,
Right.
what's going on? So
Segregated ranks.
just an incredible man. Now, next guy here, Werewolf veteran James Freeman. During his wartime experience, we Black soldiers were treated like third-class citizens, he said. He was interviewed and they put his story in Mesa at War. And that's where I found him. And I knew his family. I knew his daughters. I grew up with them, around him. And this guy has a wonderful story. He joined and he thought he was doing the right thing. And so when he was finishing, he talks about it in the book, and we talk about it in the documentary. He got out and they were sending him back. So he's back to New York. And he says when he got there, you're getting in line to get your discharge papers after they sent you back from overseas. And there were two lines. It was re-enlisting line, and there was a line to get out and be done with it. And so he stopped and he stood there and he contemplated and contemplated. And he said, I'm not going back. So he got his train ticket and he was on his way to California. Mm. On his only way to California, they stopped in Mesa. And he had been in Mesa before because he had did basic training over at Fort Huachuca and he had come through Mesa. So he knew some people in Mesa. So he got off the train, he says, and friends of his said, well, why don't you come have something to eat and, just, relax for a little bit before you head on to LA. And he got here and he enjoyed himself so much that he stayed. And he stayed, the woman that he knew ended up marrying him, and that's how his family came to Washington-Escobedo. So
what
like I said, Luetta, I think her name is Luetta Freeman, something like that. I can't think off the top of my name. But so we've always had veterans in our community. They've always been there, and we didn't always know. And like I said, it took me 9 months to a year to find folks. And then when I reach out to the families, a lot of times I knew more about their war experience than the families did, simply because they would not talk about it. Makes it very, very difficult. And here was kind of interesting. As I was doing my research, I came across this. General John Pershing says, we must not eat with them, must not shake hands with them, seek to talk to them, or to meet them outside the requirements of the military. And I thought, you cannot be serious. We're at war. We are fighting for our lives. And this is how you consider African Americans. That's a really tough break. And World War I was not any better than World War II in terms of African Americans. We don't hear a lot about them. We do hear about the Harlem Hellfighters, but that's really about it. But there were quite a few in World War I. And so with my presentation, like I said, we had two guys that were former slaves, became Buffalo Soldiers, and we had about 3 or 4 from World War I from our neighborhood. And the majority that I found were from World War II. So when I saw this, doing this research on one of my veterans from World War I, this statement just really stood out to me, that he would say that this is a private conversation. In public conversation, he said something quite different.
Of course, thankless,
But it gives you a sense of how folks were treated and how they were thought about during that time, all right? And here's one guy that really got to me, World War II veteran Concepcion Treviso, prisoner of war. And he was sent over there, and I think he was in France, and he wasn't there a month. And all hell broke loose, and he got caught. And he was in Stalag camp over there, and he spent the rest of his time as a prisoner of war. And man, that's a tough way to go. And he finally got out and came home, and he was undocumented, believe it or not. And so after all that was over, we got it. And I reached out to the family, and still waiting to hear. Haven't heard a lot about it. People didn't really talk about it. He didn't say much about it from what they've said, but I'm hoping to get more insight as to what was going on with him while he was a prisoner of war, kind of thing.
Incredible.
So as I went through my stories, I found over about 60 veterans from the neighborhood. And the exhibit is currently on display at the Mesa Veterans Resource Center here in Mesa. I think it's 150 Centennial Way, 155 Centennial Way. It's open from 9 to 7. It'll be open for the next Thursday, Friday, and then it closes. And the plan is to move it either to the Mesa Library or talking to Falcon Field about putting the exhibit on display over there. Kind of thing.
Fantastic.
And then the last photo here I have, this is just Buffalo Soldiers, photo that I just really, really like this. This is just amazing. Look at those guys' faces and where they are and the challenges they had. Really, they made it through somehow. And when I talked to a lot of the historians, just their general gear, uniform that they gave them, very often they didn't get boots. They just got whatever they could give them. And sometimes they would give them 4 pairs of socks until they could find some kind of shoes. And it varied from state to state. Here in Arizona, it was different from Buffalo Soldiers in Texas in terms of what they got in terms of a uniform and kind of thing. So that kind of rounds off the program of what I'm doing with this current exhibit that's happening in Mesa. Those are a few of the veterans. There are a lot of other stories that are worth seeing if you get an opportunity to go and see it. And it's a traveling exhibit, so if you wanted to come to your city, you can reach out to me and I can bring it to there. And so I'm going to stop with my little discussion. We're going to open it up for questions, see if people have any questions about anything or comments or anything particularly you want to ask. Figure out how we're going to do that. Laura, you're going to figure that out?
I will monitor. Yeah, absolutely. I will monitor the chat. Thank you so much for sharing the amazing posters, right? Which I find fascinating because, usually World War II posters, right, are for the people back home, right?
Right.
Save, don't eat meat on Fridays, save, all of your scraps, if you're going to get plates, eat all of your food, right?
Right.
Save cotton for bandages and stuff like that. But this was particularly pointed to African-American veterans that were already, African-American soldiers that were already there, which is interesting, right? In that, I don't remember seeing a lot. I do on certain things, but of people telling the white soldiers, this is how you were supposed to do, right? And everything like that. So this is yet another
internal
understanding of a segregated military unit, right? So although African Americans could serve, they served in wholly in segregated units, and so thanks for bringing that posters apart and Bruce's program here. I have, let's see, I could ask like 1,000 questions, but yeah, the people here are the ones that are doing it. Marion and Jim Durham, I don't know if it's both of you or what sort of medal awards did these men receive? What acknowledgments of their bravery did they get? And this is really fascinating, right? Because if you watch war movies or if you read stuff, it's always about the Medal of Honor awardees that are white, right? And don't you hear a lot about Mexican Americans, African Americans, Japanese Americans, and Native Americans. So Bruce, can you answer that for us?
Yeah, there were some of the guys that recognized, like James Freeman did get a Purple Heart. He was wounded, and it wasn't because of America, it was because of the French officers saying this man has done something amazing. And he talks about it in his story, and we tell his story. And what was happening, he was part of that D-Day invasion. And he got wounded and he got sent off to get healed up, and he was in France and everything. But before he got wounded, he talks about a story where they were going into one of the camps to free the folks, to free the Jews from just horrible treatment. And he said he came across this old Jewish guy, and he was just so grateful to him. He came up to him and he said, "Look, I really, here's this ring, this wedding band ring. Please take it." And I remember James in the story said, "No, I won't have this. This is for you." And the guy said, "No, thank you for saving us and stuff." So he kept it, and he went and got healed, and he got the Purple Heart. And he came back, and he kept that ring with him, and he gave it to his son, and his son used it to get married. And so we're trying to track him down. I'm trying to track down his son. His son would probably be around my age now, maybe a little older. So some of them did get medals. Some of them did get recognized. Not all of them. Manuel Mendoza got the Medal of Honor after he had passed away. Many of them got awards after they had passed away. And And they talk about it in a documentary about Manuel when they went to see the president. And it's a wonderful little story where the president called Manuel's wife and she thought it was a joke and hung up on him.
Wow.
So they called back and they said, no, this is the president. This is President Obama. And so, yeah, so some of them got recognized. Many of them got overlooked. Bronze, rifles, and a lot of them, they didn't get their just due, but some of them did get recognized.
It's so frustrating for me sometimes, like when you think about things like Colin Kaepernick, for example, when he making his protest about police brutality. And the first thing that, the response is that we're disrespecting the military, as if Black people didn't fight in the wars, as if people of color didn't fight in the wars and, don't have First Amendment rights that everyone else has. But, this is a all-encompassing problem, even within the military.
Absolutely, right. And we all know that, African Americans served in a segregated military for a country that segregated them in every parts of their lives. So, one of the main questions I always ask, in your research, did you find reasons for them joining? Obviously some for economic, like we saw that poster, right, of they're jingling in your pocket. But with my own veterans that I look at, it wasn't just economics. And I always never understood. I'm like, for a country that treated you so poorly, but yet you were immediately wanting to join the military. Have you come in around any good stories about why certain soldiers enlisted and what they felt like?
Some of them wanted to serve. Some of them, as I talked to, like Mr. Boyd, was in the documentary, if you saw the trailer, Mr. Boyd's going to be 100 in about 2 or 3 months. And he talks about it. They felt like they want to do their part. They felt like America, they want to do part. And so they also felt like if we go over here and fight, when we come back, things will be better. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of them joined for those reasons. They just thought, I'm part of America and we need to do our part. Where some thought it was an opportunity for money, and then some fought for other opportunities. It made it sound wonderful, kind of thing. So yeah, there were a variety of reasons that they joined. Most of them, I would say, got drafted. And one of the things that really stood out to me in our neighborhood, Todd, you probably remember the Humdies family. This man here, he had 5 sons, and all five of them went to World War II, and they all went overseas. And he lived long enough to see them all come back home. And that's just unheard of. 5 of your sons, you take them all, disregard for family life. So some positive reasons for joining, some negative reasons, and some just indecisive. It's something to do. It's better than what's going on. So yeah, it was very inspiring to hear those stories.
Absolutely, I love reading those. Oh, sorry, Todd, go ahead.
That's okay. No, my aunt just told me a story that, we don't share these stories for whatever reason, but it's how we ended up in Mesa. Was my great uncle Solomon Felix was they lived in Mississippi in a little small town, and he was going to college in Jackson State. And when he would come home, he would be threatened. He was considered uppity because he was in college with the locals, and they threatened his life. So he joined the military and went off and ended up being stationed out here, and the rest of the family followed. So there's inspiration.
And I heard those stories a lot, and there's another family going to interview that tells that story as well. So variety of reasons why people join. Like I say, some were more positive, some were more negative, right, and some were just indifferent to the whole situation.
Something to do.
All right, I have a question from Isabel. During your research, what did you find was the motivation? Well, I just kind of did that questions, but she asked particularly about why communities were going into service. You talk about Washington-Escobedo. So maybe we can expand on this about, if people didn't know, why were African Americans in this particular neighborhood?
So that, like I said, that was the first place that they were allowed to homestead, rent, or anything. Jim Crow laws, left them out of being anyplace else. And so in like 1922, 23, when Mitchell donated land for the school, that really broadened the Black community, because not only the locals from Mesa, but also kids from Chandler came over as well. So that community, that's where people started to gather, because it had more resources than Chandler. Mesa was bigger than Chandler, so had more resources. And so, and remember, Mesa wasn't a sundown town, but it was unofficial that you needed to be back in that neighborhood when the sun went down. Whereas Tempe and Scottsdale, they were legally sundown towns, and they could cite you, or the police could put you in jail if you were not out of town by then. So a lot of that had a reason for Mesa. They thought they would get treated a little better. And so that's why they kind of concentrated in that area. They could live nowhere else. Part of the reason they say that they allowed Black folks and Latinos to live in that area, because the graveyard was not too far from there. And they felt like, well, that would sort of stop the growth. Wow. Because, Black people are afraid of ghosts. So they thought, okay, they're only going to go so far, and that's going to be it. So that's really kind of where they again. And then we had our own school, we had our own churches, we had our own swimming pool eventually. We had like 4 little corner stores. And Mr. Boyd, who tells us back in the day, they had little house restaurants that you could go. And then he said every now and then somebody would get a jukebox or something, or a band would come play in the house. So, because you didn't associate downtown. So they gravitated towards that area.
And was it later that it became redlined, right? That African Americans were not allowed to purchase homes or anything past that neighborhood or anything like that?
From the beginning, it was like that, from when we first got there, and it was already contained, so it was easier. Now, Phoenix, you had a more of a structured red line than Mesa did. But once they established that was the one, it's like 1 square mile radius, and no one else was going to rent for you. And just to show you how overt they were, right next to us off there on Center Street, maybe, but not even a half a mile is the Evergreen district, and that was a white zoning district. And there are even signs that I found when I was in research saying you cannot sell this property to anybody Black or Jew or whatever. And most recently, I'm on the Mesa Historical Preservation Board, and the Evergreen is a historical district. And I had told them about people's deeds and things. And one guy said that his deed, even to this day, still says you cannot sell your land to Jews, Blacks, Mexicans, anybody else. But it had a caveat: you can sell it to someone, but they must be a slave and indentured for life. And that was the only way around it. That's just happened recently. So wow, that was unofficial redlining for Mesa.
They wrote these things down.
Definitely, it's fascinating. And along with we get the Washington-Escobedo neighborhood, and often like you were saying, Black and Mexican neighborhoods, right, were kind of meshed together because Mexicans were also discriminated against and everything. I noticed that a couple of the soldiers there had Spanish surnames, or that could be considered Spanish surnames, and I'm assuming there was a lot of mixed racial and ethnic in that neighborhood that kind of worked together. Reminded me kind of like LA.
Yeah, when it was when the first group was Mexican and African American, that was right there. And it wasn't until much later that you had anybody other than that. I mean, folks living there didn't really care if someone white wanted to move in; they wouldn't ostracize them. They're like, if you want to move in, it's fine with us. But no, they really didn't want to be there. But as far as the community was concerned, they wouldn't run you out of the neighborhood if that's where you wanted to live. They would embrace you.
Wow.
They were okay with it.
And that's interesting too, right? Because Mexican Americans and people of Mexican descent were not segregated in the military because they were legally classified as white. They were still discriminated against, right? And still redlined and, pushed aside and everything. But in the military, they were allowed to, be in any job, right? Or they could go through the ranks. Most were combat because their education and discrimination. But I found it fascinating of the people that you were talking about sometimes had Spanish surnames. So that neighborhood is just really a multi-ethnic, multi-racial cultural center, even then during World War II. I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, you're talking the 30s or 40s and 50s, you had a huge influx. But also, I mean, you know, we went to school, when I was going, it was predominantly African-American school. We had Latinos and Native Americans. And then when we got integrated, one of the things we found fascinating is the teachers would change their name if they couldn't say it. They would just change it.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'd be like, well, that's not his name, or that's not her name. Why are you, sorry you can't say it, but you know, don't change your name. But
Right.
you know, definitely, and not allowed to speak Spanish at all.
Right.
In Booker T. Washington, the teachers were fine with it. They were like, yes, but you're going to speak it properly. I remember Miss Johnson saying, you're going to speak your language properly. Don't come in here with all the slang. You need to understand it. But as we got integrated, we saw those issues. So yeah, it was that two population we had. Native Americans were there, and I always laughed. I remember, I think in the 7th grade at Carson Junior High, we were sitting watching some group of people, and the teacher said, come and sit Indian style. And we all looked at each other like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And we were like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, sit down and cross your legs. Well, say that. I don't know what Indian style, I'd never heard that before, kind of thing. So, you know, you pick those things up as you go along.
Absolutely. Let's see, I have a question from Betsy. Is there a move to get those deeds changed, as some communities are doing? I'm assuming like the segregation one, I'm assuming that is what she means.
You know, I just really sort of gave it some thought. I hadn't really thought about it before. And technically, I don't know that you could stop that, because that's the property owner saying, this is what we want. That deed, you could probably enforce that deed okay in these times. I don't know how you would get around it. So I've toyed with the idea of doing a documentary about it and going to the community and saying, hey, would you guys mind pulling out these deeds and sharing them with me and talking about them? Because a lot of them didn't know when they got there that's what they were getting into. So I have considered it, and most of them don't talk about it, and no one really knows. And I brought it up, and they were surprised that I knew that those documents existed. We were having a public meeting, and they were kind of like, oh, we didn't know anybody knew. We thought we were the only ones, because we're the only ones that see it. So there isn't a movement as of yet to do that, but it's something that I've been toying with.
And you know, to this day, I think, you know, you hear about African Americans when they're selling their houses, they like, you know, de-black their house, like take down all the photographs, take down all of the art to kind of neutralize the situation. You know, that's reality.
All right, I have one from Tom, and this is this one is kind of like an overall specific, and I find this fascinating because there's, you know, historians try not to say, well, what was worse? Was the 1950s, you know, and Rosa Parks and civil rights, was it worse than it is now, kind of thing. I don't know if we could really put a barometer on that, because it's just different times, right? But Tom asks, you know, what do we do about like the prejudice of old compared to today? Do we read their books and revere them and consider that times past were less egregious but intolerable now, or do we eschew them all and the bigots in all of their work, no matter how long ago? I don't know if you'd have an answer for that, but
a big question.
Yeah,
I'm like this. I always feel like this. If you're going to tell history, tell all of the history. You know, the good, the bad, the indifferent, the ugly. You tell it all, because it helps us move into the future. Because there are signs there that crop up, little things that crop up, and if you catch them soon enough, you can put a stop to them. You say, okay, we need to stop this now, because if we don't, this can turn into something even worse up the road. And yeah, I don't like to quantify, you know, gooder times, better times, because it evolves. Now, the laws were more stringent in those times, but you think about today, remember, there is still no law that says it's illegal to hang a Black man, and that's still on the books, and it still has not been done away with. So it's a challenge to move forward, and I think we can. And something interesting happened when I was at the Historical Preservation Board. We had a group called Daughters of the Revolutionary War came and presented. and they want to do some type of monument or plaques, I guess, commemorating that heritage. And in order to become a member, you have to show linkage to that of some kind of bloodline to that you're connected to that. And so I did some research on that and looked at that and looked them up and found out stuff. So when they came to present, I had some questions about what they were thinking of doing and what they wanted to do. And so one of the things that I pointed out to them, I said, well, let's go back to that first war, first American war. One of the through lines through all three of those wars was they were fighting for their way of life, and their way of life was only Negroes. That's what they did. I mean, that was working for them. Same thing with the War of 1812. And African Americans fought on both sides. And both sides said, if you fight for us and we win, we will free you. And when those wars ended, they didn't free them. And so I asked them, well, what's the difference between highlighting those folks and those from the Confederacy? How do we differentiate from that? Because the through line is the same in terms of what they're celebrating. And so it's interesting to see what will happen. I don't know if Arizona is going to buy into it or not, but I think it's an early sign. And if that happens, then, years from now, people look back and go, well, how did you let that happen? And I pointed out to them, I said, in your website, and I looked through your pages, you don't celebrate Crispus Attucks in a way that I think you should. And they just kind of went, oh, okay, well. And then you probably know the story of Marian Anderson, who was going to sing at one of their facilities, and they denied her that. Right. And then Roosevelt's wife said, no, I'm going to put her out on the Lincoln Square or wherever it was and integrate it and it came. And that's what I said. So you've evolved from that way of thinking, but that troubles me that you have to evolve to include people in your program. And we could be part of the Revolutionary War, but we can't prove it because there's no way to link our heritage because we don't know the names of our people, our African people dating back. And so that just pushes us out automatically. So I always say you embrace all of history. You read it all and keep it in context and you learn from it. So that's kind of the way I look at that.
Right.
Thank you. Isabel has another question. What resources or records have you found to help in researching African-American lives, the particular people maybe that you're talking about, I should say?
There's Ancestry, there's newspapers, microfilm as they call it. Some of it has been digitized, some of it hasn't. But Ancestry is a great resource. There's a lot of things that have been written about the wars. Library of Congress has a ton of things. The challenge is navigating through that because they're not, you may type in something and you may not get what you're looking for. So it takes a lot of referencing and trying to think about the Freeman's Institute. They have a lot of stuff, but it's a real challenge trying to find it. But the Library of Congress has a ton of stuff. If you ever get an opportunity to listen to some of the slave stories, take a minute and listen to them. Some actors are reading their stories, and they have some interviews from former slaves that they have on their website as well that you can listen to. I think it was around the 1930s or 40s or something that someone went across the country and interviewed former slaves. And then there are books, former slaves have written. And of course, Frederick Douglass, if you ever get an opportunity to read his autobiography, you should definitely read it because he is so right on point about it. So there's a lot of resources out there, but you're going to have to do a lot of digging to get to them.
Absolutely. And those WPA narratives is, I believe, what you're talking about is during the Depression, work progress administration by FDR hired people to go around to listen to freed peoples and tell them their oral history while they typed it up. Those are free and available. Just look up WPA slave narratives. Military records, as a military historian, are very difficult to get when you're talking about 1940s because it's privacy, right? But I encourage people to come look in our archives. We have some great oral histories and everything, and it's also difficult to get military records because there was a huge fire in the 70s in St. Louis, and it destroyed thousands hundreds of thousands of records. My dad was actually one of those that lost his records. So getting military records that you're not directly related to, heck, even if you are directly related to, it takes a while. So, you know, Bruce, and what you're doing here is you're piecing together different their histories from different sources. That takes a lot of different ways to look at things, you know. So it's digging through archives digitally and in person to get these really important stories that we don't get enough of, right? We just don't get enough of, you know, Black Americans' contributions to this country, from, like you said, pre-revolution to, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan today, that have been, you know, overlooked. And you had mentioned, you know, that they're trying to get the medals kind of up, acknowledged, I should say. And it wasn't just that they were overlooked. Black Americans were specifically denied those medals because of who they were. So from the 90s, late 90s, you know, the military has tried to do better. So anyways, I have talked enough. And if anybody else has any questions, I think we have time for maybe one more. I'm trying, there was another one of, Betsy had qualified her statement. In Minnesota, communities are removing the restrictive covenant language from the deeds as a human rights project. And, you know, it's kind of interesting. I don't live in Phoenix, but I also heard that there were all kinds of meetings about renaming street names because some of those street names were named after Ku Klux Klan members. So there was a huge meeting on that. And I guess Todd probably is a better person to ask on that one, just because I don't live in Phoenix.
Yeah, we're at the center of that. Now we just kind of house the receipts. I think it's the Tempe History Museum that is actually doing the story, and the city of Tempe. But you can come to the archives and check out the information.
Absolutely.
You know, we definitely have the receipts, and they wrote these things down. So
that's the best part of the archives, right? Is that we try to keep all of the stuff to that wrote the check. So, all right. Well, I don't see any other questions. I want to thank both of you so much for being part of this program, and to remind viewers that this recording will be up on our YouTube page. Along with, we'll include the links to those two documentaries, the trailer and everything, Bruce, so that people can, you know, if they haven't had a chance to check those out, they can check that out and then listen to your program again. And Bruce, can you tell us one more time about your exhibit and when and where, so that we can all make plans to go to Mesa and check it out?
So it's at the Mesa Veterans Resource Center. I think it's 155 Centennial Way. It's right downtown, next to the library, next to the Chamber of Commerce. And it's only open for 2 more days. It opened on Monday. It's open from 9 to 7. And I encourage you to go in and take a look. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to my documentary about my neighborhood. Just give me a minute to figure that out.
We have time.
And it's online. It's on Amazon. If you have Amazon Prime, you can stream it. We did show it at the Tempe site as part of exhibit they had going on, and it was there for like a year, wasn't it, Tom?
Yeah, very well received, and for over a year. It's called Northtown, which
I'm going to pop that in the chat. Give me a second to pull it up, and I think if you have Amazon Prime, it might even be free, but streaming it is pretty inexpensive. It's like a couple of bucks. And it's 65 minutes, which I didn't think I would get that much time. I was surprised when it came out that long. I was really hoping only for about, 10 or 15 minutes, and I ended up getting more than that. So it's definitely something. I'm just about there where I can give you the link. It's always kind of, when you want to get something fast, you can't.
And if you can't get it, we can send it out on the YouTube page or something to the to the people that came to the thing. So don't worry, we'll get you that information. I want to thank, while we wait for that, I want to thank again everybody for coming and joining us. And please keep an eye out on our website, because we're having these virtual programs, even though our museums are open, in which we encourage you to come visit. We also know that these virtual programs are an important part of sharing history to more people. So keep an eye out on our website, where we'll have other programs for you. There's got to be something there that'll interest people. So Betsy, how do they reach you for more information?
For Bruce.
I think he's still trying to get the.
How to reach me? You got
Yes.
you got my email and stuff. So
Right.
please share
I can
with
put all that
everybody.
information in
In the chat.
in the chat. There are the when we send out our link to the recording. So
His
we can
website
put
is
all of
great.
that. Yeah, we can put all of that information in there.
Okay, that'll be great. Yeah, I mean, I think you'll enjoy it. You'll get some little surprises. And just so you know, Northtown, we're revamping it. I went and found some new information. So we're going to come with an updated version in about 3 or 4 months. But thank you so much for having me. It was always a pleasure to share information with people.
That's awesome. Thank you, Todd. Thank you
Amazing.
again, and Bruce, and thank you for everybody for coming. And we'll see you next time. Drive safely if you're driving tonight. Take care.